When you think of the best handheld consoles of all time, you might think of things like the Nintendo DS, the Game Boy, the Nintendo Switch. Nintendo really nails those portable consoles. But I remember when Sony actually came out with a handheld game console that for a while there really stood up to the Nintendo DS. The first real competitor to Nintendo's domination of the handheld game console market was the PlayStation Portable, or the PSP. Now, this thing has shaped so many childhoods. I was, however, somehow the only person I know who had a PSP during my childhood. Now, I had them all, man. I had a Game Boy, I had all kinds of different shit. I had SPs, I had the Nintendo DS, I had the DSi, and of course, I had the PlayStation Portable. Now, many of us will argue that the PlayStation Portable's real problem was that it was really ahead of its time. And realistically, it kinda was. I mean, we look at things like the Nintendo Switch now, which is obviously one of the most popular game consoles on Earth right now, and we love the idea of being able to take a handheld console out into anywhere we want to and be able to play these games with console graphics, high quality resolution, everything, just all kinds of different stuff, online gameplay. There's so many cool features that we love in the Nintendo Switch, but what people don't really talk about often is that the PlayStation Portable, the PSP, had a lot of these things in 2005. So the PSP came out, like I said, in early 2005 around most of the world. It actually came out in late December of 2004 in Japan, and is the first real competitor to Nintendo in the handheld market. I mean, the Geo Pocket was a failure, so wasn't Nokia's N-Gage. Microsoft never really put out a handheld gaming console, so yeah, Sony, you're stacked up with facing off against the DS, which is a pretty tall order. The DS was extremely popular. It's one of the best handheld consoles of all time. Everybody that I ever remember being friends with had some form of Nintendo DS, whether it was the DS, the DSi, the 3DS. God, they only made 90 different versions of that shit. They rode that wave, but the PSP was insane, okay? And the reason that it was crazy was because of how versatile this thing was. You could sit in your bed and just play all these different games, having the best time, right? And then your mom yells, "We gotta go to the store." Guess what? Your PSP can go with you. So all the games that you're sitting there in bed playing and having fun playing, you're taking that to the store, man, and you can play this thing for hours on end without having to charge it. From what I can remember, it actually had a really decent battery life, which obviously was awesome, especially considering everything that the PSP was really able to do. It had a pretty good battery life. I mean, the thing was giant in the back of the console, so you could play this damn thing anywhere, man. I remember as really little kids, everybody would sneak their DS to school, and they would try to play it at recess. Of course, they'd get their shit confiscated. I snuck my PSP to school a few times. I mean, I had a DS, but the PSP had more versatility in the options for games too. Of course, the DS had an amazing lineup of games and stuff to play, but when it came down to it, you could get all kinds of different games for the PSP. You could even play PlayStation classics, man. You could just be sitting there, hey, I'm playing some God of War on my PlayStation Portable. The graphics are so good that they look, well, at least at the time, they look just comparable to the consoles themselves. But hey, you done playing God of War? You're bored of that? Guess what? Pop in FIFA, pop in Madden, pop in Grand Theft Auto. There was all kinds of different really popular game franchises that you could play on this damn thing in pretty good quality. Like I said, battery life was great, could take it anywhere, man. There was so much versatility to this console. Play anywhere, anything you want. In the year 2017 and 18, people have been praising the Nintendo Switch for all these third-party games and stuff that are finally being opened up by Nintendo to come onto their console, which obviously allows for more variety of games and stuff that you can play on, but the PSP had this a decade ago, 15 years ago almost. There were shooters like SOCOM that came out on the PSP. I think Call of Duty was even on the PSP at some point. Then, like I said, you could go put in and play Madden. You could play like MLB The Show and FIFA. If you got bored of that, you could play Grand Theft Auto, Chinatown Wars, and Vice City Stories. I know myself, I can't imagine how much time I put into Vice City Stories on the PSP, dude. I had that game for like 4 years, and for a while there, that was the only game I even played. Then, of course, there was titles like God of War, Final Fantasy, Talentsy, PlayStation 1 classics, and everything that you could play on this damn thing. So you had this little game console with this huge variety of titles that you could play virtually anywhere, good battery life. The screen was a decent size too, actually. And for a handheld game console, it really stacked up against the competition. It really provided nice graphics. But the one thing that it had that I think that was the most overlooked was all of the different multimedia options. You could literally put music on your PSP, you could put pictures, you could put movies. If you could fit it onto the storage, guess what? You could put it on the PSP. So for a lot of kids, the one place that they hid their porn was on the internet browser in the PSP. Oh yeah, by the way, it also had an internet browser. You could sit there fapping to fucking whatever on your PSP. Mom comes in the room, guess what? Playing the PSP. It was the ultimate cover-up. And then, of course, like I said, you could put music on it. You could put your family photos on it. Hey, you went on vacation? There you go, pictures on your PSP. You want to play some kick-ass music while you're not playing games at the skate park or whatever? Hey, your PSP can do that too. And another really cool thing about the PSP was how early it really was to digital video game sales, okay? On the PSP, you had access to the PlayStation Store, and you could buy PSP games digitally online through this PlayStation Store and then download them to your PSP. I mean, in 2018, we have things like Steam, of course, which it did exist back then, but it was just crazy that on a handheld console, you could do something like that. And this thing could connect to pretty much anything. You could connect onto the internet, you could connect with PS2s, PS3s, PCs, I'm pretty sure Mac, I'm not 100% sure. You could connect with other PSPs. There was so much shit you could do with it. It was so just expansive with how much you could do with just this little handheld game console. And not to mention, man, this thing had the weirdest game of all time. Like the way they had the games was so weird, especially at the time. Being a little kid, I'd never seen anything like this before. The PSP didn't use like a cartridge like you would expect with a DS or something like that, and even like today with the Nintendo Switch, it didn't have anything like that. And of course, it was too small to use CDs or DVDs or anything like that. So the main way that you physically loaded a game into the PSP, actually the only way you could, was using something called a Universal Media Disc, or a UMD. Now these things were weird. I mean, you're seeing a picture of it, you might have never seen anything like this, because as of right now, they're obsolete. They're gone. These things were just odd. This is something you would expect on like a Kanye West album cover, you know? I don't think another console has ever used anything like this before. And then afterwards, I mean, the PSP was the only one that ever used the UMD. Now, some of you have never heard of the PSP before, and you're hearing all this stuff, and you're hearing about how versatile it was, and how it was almost like an earlier version of, say, a Nintendo Switch, and you're thinking to yourself, how come I've never had something like this? And that, unfortunately, is because Sony decided in the year 2011, and then later worldwide in February of 2012, that they wanted to go with something newer called the PlayStation Vita, which means that the PSP, or the PlayStation Portable, was put on the back burner and was dying a slow death. And over the years, it just started to decline. They weren't selling anymore. The PlayStation Vita was the new thing. Of course, we had newer models of the DS and things like that. The PSP had become old news because Sony, instead of, you know, actually making a better version of the PSP and then actually making that the Vita, decided that they were going to go the completely opposite direction and ruin the PSP by making the PS Vita. So after this happened, like I said, in 2011 and then later on in February 2012 worldwide, the PSP, the sales just declined. Games coming out started to taper off. In 2014, the PSP's hardware stopped becoming shipped, which meant that they were no longer selling new PSPs or making new PSPs. On March 31st of 2016, access to the PlayStation Store via the PSP was shut down. And after the year 2016, UMDs had stopped being produced. The production of software UMDs was done. The last factories making them closed down, which meant that no more PSP games would be printed. So now with no access to new UMDs to make new games, and then of course no access to the PlayStation Store, there was no more games coming out for the PSP. There were no new PSPs being made and sold, so that was pretty much the end of it all. I'm still lucky, right? I'm still lucky enough to have my original PSP. This damn thing's beat to hell. I don't have a charger for it, but I still have it. I don't have many of the games that I had for it anymore. I've lost them as time goes on, but this this piece of my childhood, this memory box that I spent so many days throughout maybe the ages of about 7 to 12 just pouring time into, is still here. In the 10 years that the PSP was available, it sold over 80 million consoles. Now, the PlayStation Vita, which is technically the successor to the PSP, is actually going to shut down its production of the system and their cartridge games in 2019, which means that PlayStation's run of making handheld game consoles that started with the glory of the PSP might be coming to a total end. Now, the PS Vita was not even close to as popular as the PSP, at least from what we know. Right now, they think, well, because Sony hasn't actually released the numbers, they think that the Vita has sold maybe 15 to 16 million consoles, which wouldn't even crack a quarter of what the PSP did. On top of that, the Vita just couldn't compete. It wasn't as good as the PSP. It had better technology, it might have had a better game lineup overall. The real problem with the Vita is that, unlike the PSP, it really tried to compete with smartphones and tablets. That was the big thing that Sony wanted to go after. With the PSP, they were competing with Nintendo. In 2005, mobile gaming was virtually non-existent compared to what it is now. In 2012, everybody was playing, Candy Crush or Flappy Bird or something like that. Their idea that this was going to compete just didn't work out for them. The successful launch that it did have was actually then ruined in the years after, when sales for the Vita started to decline, the better games that were actually bigger budgeted and things like that actually stalled out, and overall it just couldn't keep up with what the PSP left behind legacy-wise. So the PSP is the real focus here. This thing had the ability to become a movie theater, to become an MP3 player, an online gaming console to play with your friends, could be taken virtually anywhere, had a really good battery life, had a decent sized screen, the controls were fluent, the games on the console itself were really fun, and overall I just don't think that the PSP really got enough credit for what it brought to the gaming industry, because when I look at the success of the Nintendo Switch, and I see what people like about that and the great things about the Nintendo Switch, even though I own one, I know, I understand why it's fun. A lot of the things that people are hailing for the Switch had been done by the PSP a decade, almost 15 years ago, and it just doesn't seem like it got that credit that it deserved, so that's why I made this video. Thank you guys for watching this. If you did enjoy, make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you're brand new around here, tell me what you thought about the PSP down below, if you have any memories, any games you played, things like that. I love to hear about that stuff. Follow me on Twitter at @SubToOptimus, join the Discord down below. Thank you to my channel members for your $5 a month. Your support helps my channel tremendously, and until my next video, guys, this is Optimus, ordering that charger for his PSP, and signing out.